welcome to our event with Jeff Chang and Dave, Davey D for the launch of the young adult edition of the must-read classic, Can't Stop, Won't Stop, Hip Hop History. Here to lead the conversation tonight is the one and only RyanNicole. I know we're all in for a big treat of an evening. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Evan Karp. I'm the events manager for Booksmith. We're an independent bookstore and a mainstay of San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district since 1976. Here to lead the conversation is Grammy-nominated quadruple treat RyanNicole, who utilizes every gift available to her for the liberation of all people. Affectionately titled The 4A, RyanNicole seeks opportunities to empower and inspire by way of her pursuits as an award-winning artist, actress, athlete, and activist. And you can find out more about RyanNicole at MsRyanNicole.com. Davey D is a nationally recognized journalist, adjunct professor at San Francisco State, hip-hop historian, political commentator, syndicated talk show host, radio programmer, media justice, and community activist. And Jeff Chang has been a hip-hop journalist for more than a decade and has written for the San Francisco Chronicle, The Village Voice, Vibe, The Nation, URB, Rap Pages, Spin, and Mother Jones. He's the author of several books, including the American Book Award-winning Can't Stop, Won't Stop, History of the Hip Hop Generation. He was a founding editor of Color Lines magazine, senior editor at Russell Simmons' 360hiphop.com, and co-founder of the influential hip-hop label Soul Sides, now Quantum Projects. He lives in California. Always a pleasure to host you, Jeff, and to see you. Welcome, congratulations on the book, Jeff and Davey D. RyanNicole, thanks so much for being here tonight.
Thank you so much, Evan. Thank you, Booksmith. I am so honored to be here. Really excited about this conversation we're going to have about this phenomenal book right here, Can't Stop, Won't Stop. I have my own personal copy and I hold it like a Bible. It is of critical importance. We should swear upon it anytime we decide to MC or grab a microphone or b-boy or spray paint or whatever it is that we're intending to do under the moniker of hip hop. What's up, Davey? What's up, Jeff? How you guys feeling this evening?
We're good, and we're glad to see you up here with us. So thank you for doing this.
I'm honored. I really am. I don't mince words when I say that. Jeff, what's good?
It's great to see you, and just so much Bay Area love to you, and just thank you for being with us today. You're amazing, and this is just a really right way to set it off in our home area. So thank you.
Word, no worries. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's important to indicate that we are right here in the Bay Area, all of us from our own personal hovels. I'm out of Oakland, California, born and raised and intentionally here. Davey, where are you at?
I'm in the town, you know, in my humble abode with my big poster in the back.
Yeah, that's nice. And where are you from? Where are you at, Davey or Jeff?
Out here in Berkeley, California. So, yes.
All right. Cool. It's a nice sunset out there. It looks good.
Yes.
So let's get into this book. In 2005, when Can't Stop, Won't Stop first dropped, it was a necessity for me to read. I was just coming into hip hop as a practitioner. I had been a part of the culture, born into the culture, most certainly as a child of the 80s, or as the book indicates, Luke 2. You know, as a practitioner, it was just a necessary read, you know, knowing that I felt like I understood hip hop through osmosis. It just felt like something that I needed to pick up on to be sure that I understood the history. Tell me why, after 15 years, Can't Stop, Won't Stop 2 needs to be in print. Why is it here?
Actually, it's here because of our visionary editor, Monique Patterson, who's one of the few Black editors in the publishing industry. And, you know, things are changing now. We've seen amazing appointments of incredible editors over the last year, and especially accelerating last fall. Monique's been in this, you know, since 2000, and she was the one who gave me the first chance to be able to write this book. She saw the value of it before probably even I did, in many ways. And she approached me, I want to say about 3-4 years ago, and was like, it's time we should really do a version of this for a new generation. And that was, I took that as a huge blessing. The book's, how to good life. And I've had kids, Dave's had kids. We've all, we've all kind of raised, or are raising the next generation. And to think about like what we could leave as stories, to be able to pass on, the kinds of hidden stories that don't get told in classrooms and that kind of thing, was it was something that we couldn't pass up. The first call I made was to Davey, to say, hey man, I need you. Can we do this? And he was gracious enough to say yes. And so we embarked on this process, and here we are.
Well, I know Davey is an outstanding journalist, and just really, I've said it time and time again, a living legend. Why did you call Davey though? Like, you could have called, maybe somebody else. Don't tell him I told you. Why Davey?
Really? There's other people I could have called?
Maybe.
Wow.
Could you have?
Nah. Dave was like the one and the only person. Dave raised me up. We like to joke that he's like my older brother. He got his start many years before I did, and so I came up under his wing. We're pretty actually close in age, so we actually joke about that a lot. But Dave, we met in college over here at Cal, and Dave was the voice of what was, I think at that time, this rising hip hop movement in the Bay that brought together sort of this idea of a new generational politics, as well as being really down for the culture. And he broadcast that like once, twice, sometimes more a week. Right. So I was a faithful listener. I learned so much from Dave, and we got to be, good friends. And so me and him go way back. And, Dave lived the story. Dave grew up in the Bronx. I'm not going to get in the way of Dave telling his story, but he just brought all of that and laid it on me. And that's really, I owe everything to Dave in terms of my writing career. And so the opportunity to be able to kind of do this together was just amazing. And I'm just happy he said yeah.
So, I mean, I kid. I don't think there's anybody else whose, histories I want to read. And then knowing that he lives in our backyard, you live in our backyard, Davey, is just an honor. And that we get to listen to you, almost every day on the radio, 4 p.m., KPFA, Hard Knock Radio, if anybody else doesn't know out there, right? Check it out. Davey, please tell me, this book is beautiful, and it reads like a full-on history, like a reference book. It's a necessity to have, but it also is evocative and reads like a flip book of sorts. Every passage that I've read lands me in that moment at that time. And I know there's so much more behind each story, behind each snapshot. Tell me what the experience was like for you, incorporating stories, but condensing them down to just the most salient points.
Well, now you just open up a can of worms, because, I'm used to writing for myself. And in fact, writing for publications, and I've done many, I don't like it because, it's like, you can't say everything you want to say. So I write for myself. I own all my writings, even the ones that have been in newspapers and what have you. And I come from a tradition where it's important that we keep a record of what goes on. And I think with each passing year, especially nowadays where we see the erasing of history and the distortion and the distortion of history. So, you have textbooks that now refer to enslaved Africans as workers and things like that. Our stories are very important, and what we write becomes an important blueprint for a lot of people to look at and say, okay, this is what was going on at this particular time, the Black experience in our case, or maybe the hip hop experience. And that shouldn't be taken for granted. I often remind people, if you don't believe how quickly things can be erased, tell me what the Black experience was after 9/11, and it's almost impossible for people to really remember. They may recall Barbara Lee, being the only Congresswoman to say no. And that's about it. All the other stuff, we don't know the names of people who passed. We don't know the heroes. We almost forgot the songs that came out, and it was like 100 hip hop songs that came out after 9/11. All that's erased. And so with that being said, when Jeff asked me, I came with all that stuff. It's like, well, you asked me to tell a story. Here's the whole story. And I give it to Jeff. And first of all, he's a great writer. So he's able to condense that and take all that. But there was, these decisions. It's like, Dave, this is a lot of stuff. You have a choice here. If we talk about RyanNicole winning a Grammy and we tell that story, then we're going to have to take out the part about maybe Cat Brooks winning a Grammy. Which do you want to do? Right. Cat Brooks, local, activist. Yeah. So with those type of agonizing decisions, and what it showed me is that I'm going to have to tell the stories in a way that capture the essence, and it's okay to do it in such a way that maybe you coming behind us can tell a more complete story. So that's part of what we were doing. The other thing was, it was important for us to give people a foundation, because I just finished teaching, and I mean,
just now,
yeah. And a couple of weeks ago, I had people not know really the story behind Tupac. And he's from here. Wow. Right. Yeah. I had people that didn't know about the East-West Coast thing. And
let's for context, what are you teaching? What grade? Where are you?
I'm teaching at college, college level. So, I teach hip hop and social movements and things that I would take for granted. Mm-hmm. So you might say something. So when Tribe Called Quest came out, who's Tribe Called Quest? Wow. And then you remind them, it's like, oh, that's my parents' music. And then you realize, like, okay, a lot of that important history is gone. And so it was important to provide, I think what Jeff said, provide a blueprint so people have that, knowing that maybe 5 years down the road, there will be these stories that are more suited for, my kids who might be teens then, and they want to know what was going on back in the good old days. And the good old days for them will be 2016. Remember back in the days, so that's going to be their back in the days. Yeah. But we want to make sure that they have this important history. And I'll close with this. Look at jazz. Mm-hmm. So if we talk about the history of jazz, most people will start with maybe the bebop era. Mm-hmm. They might go, they'll go to Miles, they'll talk about Thelonious Monk and, Coltrane, but nobody's talking about Buddy Bolden and Fred Kepler and all those folks. Nobody wants to go back to 2015, but that's important to know what was going on in New Orleans. All that story is important. Right. So I think we give people that grounding, and it was a pleasure to do it. I learned a lot, and that's where it was. Jeff told me at the end that he had to cut, 300 pages from his first manuscript. That's amazing. And he was going to cut me in return. That everybody's got to learn,
Keep it hip hop. He's going to cut you up.
And what's even funny is that there are other writers that I've come across, and they all have a Jeff story. Man, I gave Jeff 100 pages, and he told me I had to cut 50. So apparently I got it light because he didn't tell me to go back and actually cut it. He just did it himself. Wow. But others tell the story that they had to go back and do the cutting themselves. So I guess.
Man. So you got the good experience. Yeah. That's pretty good. 300 pages.
And he was smiling like that. He was like, "Hey man, this ain't all going in this book. Not this time."
Jeff knows the game by now. He's got his scissors on deck. Nice. He knows how it goes. So we started by talking about Miss Monique Smith, and I just want to acknowledge her and her ability to see the necessity for the original book, seeing the necessity for this second book, and highlight her presence as a publisher and as the backbone, really, to the genesis of this publication. Mm-hmm. Similarly to the way that you guys highlighted so many women as foundational parts of hip hop's rising. When we talk about hip hop nowadays, for those of us who are still talking about it, oftentimes women get excised from the story, or they get mentioned kind of as a passing phase, as well, Queen Latifah happened, and that was an era, and then Lil Kim and Lauryn Hill happened, and that was a moment, and now we have Cardi B and and Meg The Stallion, as if women weren't always present. So tell me about your intent around, mentioning Cindy, Herc's sister from the very beginning, and then continuing all the way. I think the last name I read was Ruby Ibarra. Tell me about that intentionality and what that's about for you.
Well, first of all, we're both married and we have wives that we got to answer to. And I think, my wife is not trying to hear all that erasure, that's on top of the strong women that I know. So with the Cindy thing, I was in a panel in Montreal, and there's a woman named Toni Blackman, who everybody should know. She headed up a group called Freestyle Union, and she was also an official representative for the United States, an ambassador of sorts for hip hop. And I remember we were doing this panel, we were talking about the history, and we told the story of Kool Herc. And then she leaned over to me, it's like, what about Cindy? Yes. It's like, well, Cindy who? Herc's sister, because, she's the one that organized the party.
Right.
And, Cindy has that type of presence like you and my wife and others. Like, we're not leaving this, event without really understanding that this is going to be a transformational moment.
Right.
And from then on, it was like Cindy is included. You say Kool Herc, you say Cindy Campbell. And, I often tell the story that a couple of months afterwards, Herc was at my house. He was doing an interview, and Cindy was there. And it was like, oh, snap, that's Cindy. And, was trying to ask her questions. She's like, no, talk to my brother. But, no, it's like, you're going to get Cindy's story. And, I'm sure Jeff had similar type of revelations and experiences, but Cindy was important. Cindy was the organizer of that party. Cindy was, the backbone of that. And, she's the first entrepreneur in many ways, and that's important to note. And throughout the book, we didn't want to tokenize the presence of women. We just didn't want to have a chapter. We do have a chapter on women, but women are present all throughout. And that was very intentional, to make sure that within eyesight, you're going to be like, okay, there's this story. What were the women doing? And they're there. And that was, that's what we wanted to do because we realized the contributions, they're not minuscule, they're major. Yeah. And there's still so many more stories to tell about women. The many women are, behind the scenes like Monique that have done stuff, some from the Bay, your Danielle Smith, your Timbisa and Shaka's, the whole crew that they had, the See It Live crew out of Mills. So we can go on. And these were backbone type of individuals. It was women that brought me into radio, so. Okay. So, Barry Scott over at KPFA, it was her who brought me in, Jen Bonoza, helped me get into radio, Rennell, and, for KMEL. So, along with Alex Mejia, but those are key people. And so we have to, acknowledge that and uplift it.
Word. Peace to that.
I want to shout out this book. I don't know if y'all can see it, but it's maybe not, but it's The Mother Lode, Clover Hope's new book. 100 Plus Women Who Made Hip Hop. I mean, it's a fantastic book, but it's just a reflection of, the story being told in its fullest. And, we can do what we can do within the pages of our book, but, it's really important for us to recognize who put us on. I mean, Monique put me on. Before that, it was Sheena Lester. Danielle Smith was my editor. A woman named Sue Cummings at the Los Angeles Weekly. Like, these are the folks who put us on. So we get to do things like talk about the first Hip Hop and Feminism Conference.
In Chicago.
In Chicago, University of Chicago. We get to mention that. We get to talk about Joan Morgan and, how she kind of birthed the kind of hip hop feminist movement in a lot of ways with When Chicken Heads Come Home to Roost. So it's
Rosa Clemente.
We get to talk about Rosa. We get to talk about a lot of different folks, and this is the story that should have been told, really, to be completely real, in the first edition. And so, again, it's a blessing for us to be able to come back and make sure that the record is is full.
And
Word.
and one thing that we should also know, we're peers. These are our peers.
Yeah.
And just to put it bluntly, we didn't want to see RyanNicole up in these streets, holding our book on Sun. We're gonna have a meeting in the ladies' room for real.
Oh, no.
So and that's a good thing. It's called being accountable. There's a community that I think would hold us accountable, and not in any sort of threatening way, but I think the disappointment that people like yourself would have with us if we came up short like that
No
would
doubt.
be something that we didn't, want to experience. Be like, yo, for real? Like you did 300 pages and only one mention of
Right.
Sun. We don't want to have that type of conversation. So there you
think
go.
If you all, if there were ever any proper stewards of the story, it would be you guys. I think you write, you create with integrity. I've never known you, Davey, to be a journalist that misses, aspects of the story or doesn't correct aspects of the story. Jeff, similarly, haven't known you to be a writer to miss things. That being said, since we're talking about it, in 05, when the first one dropped, KRS had some criticisms, right? That the aspects of the story were missing. What was some of his criticism? Let me make sure I read. And knowing that hip hop is a space where the battle is just part of the culture, right? Contention will be found. What can you anticipate will be, if any, some of the criticisms of this book? Let's just get into the controversy. Let's get in there.
You're going there with it, right?
Yeah, let's go.
Look, like with KRS, he was right. And some of the points that he was making, like I factually got some things wrong and had to go and correct it in future printings, and apologize to him for that. And we're good now, we're good now.
Yeah.
Folks were just like, man, like what kind of beef is this if you guys are all good with each other? I'm like, look at KRS, he took down Marley Marl, and then they went and made an album together. It's a really good record. And that record actually had the song that was dissing Can't Stop, Won't Stop in it. So it continues. But that's part of the battle, right? That's part of the battle aesthetic.
Exactly.
You expect it, you come prepared, and you have to be right with it. I mean, somebody who's not Black coming into this cipher and this space, I have to show respect. I have to be able to pay homage. I have to know, my forebears, and I need to. And if I'm going to tell the story, if people are going to entrust me with their stories, I need to be able to hold that. And I think that that's what hip hop's about, And so, I hope. I don't know, Dave, if you've been thinking about this question. I hope that people are able to kind of look at this edition and feel like, oh, they did it right. Maybe they could have said a little bit more about this or a little bit more about that. We had 300 pages to work it out in. So I don't know. Dave, what do you think?
Well, here's the thing with hip hop. I mean,
Yeah.
hip hop comes out of a space of people who are marginalized and left out from Jump Street. And that's how the first chapter starts off.
Exactly.
People were abandoned, people were overlooked, and not just overlooked in a kind of, flirtatious type of way. There were actual policies like, do not go to this neighborhood and let them be on their own. Let them eat cake. In fact, take away the cake. Let's not give them anything.
Yeah.
So the politics of abandonment. And so you had people that had to come up and really scrap, and almost all the expressions that we associate with hip hop. At the end of the day, when you sum it up, it's basically like, you're gonna recognize me one way or the other. I'm gonna be in your face on these trains with this writing, this graph writing. I'm gonna be in your face because I'm gonna take your song and I'm gonna flip it and put my own vocals over it. So that James Brown cut, that's me now, right? I'm gonna dance. It ain't gonna be no two-step. It's gonna be me like, stand back. I'm about to take over this whole floor. Mm-hmm. So you have that bodaciousness. Mm-hmm. And we called it representing, So it's not a mistake that everybody was always shouting out their neighborhood and their city. And with each artist that came out, before the advent of social media, everybody's emotions was crystallized on whoever had the mic. Right. So when I moved out to the Bay Area, for example, remember, I'm old enough to remember when Too Short first came out. it was important because Short was representing an area that was not on the map. So everything was crystallized through him. And, sure, I'm sure if you brought him up, it might be, well, you mentioned all these neighborhoods in Oakland, but you didn't mention our neighborhood, right?
Right.
You're going to get that because so much is there.
Right.
And I think that's just the nature of the beast. This is a living history. We took it all the way up to 2020, right? We took it up. We talked about the pandemic. We talked about George Floyd. We talked about Breonna Taylor, right? So we put a lot in, but there's so much more that was going on. As soon as we handed it in, then here comes Ice Cube with his contract.
Right.
Here comes all this other stuff that had stuff to do with the election. And I'm sure somebody's like, how you going to miss the Young Jeezy and Gucci Mane battle? How you not going to put that in there? You see, so that we get that. I mean, because we would do the same thing in many ways. How you going to, leave us out? But we also understand that it comes from a place where people have not gotten the shine that they, I think, in many ways deserve. And one day we should get to a point where people do have space and they do recognize and they do get their flowers, as we say today. But I will say this, that we were mindful of that. And we also understand that there are so many stories that can go a lot deeper. And so the book is really constructed for other people to take the baton and be able to tell those deeper stories. So we recognize, for example, that all the cities that we mentioned have 40 and 50-year histories at this point, right? The Bay is a 50-plus-year history. We can't tell that story, in 300 pages, but we can acknowledge like, there's a story here. Here's some tidbits. Somebody else take that baton and do a whole book on that. If you're in Chicago, which we mentioned, that's a 40-year history. Take the baton. We gave you some tidbits, run with it. And, in demographics as well, if we left out folks, because we tried to talk about different countries and all that, there's just so much to cover. And that's a good thing. There's an abundance of stories to tell. The goal now is for the younger generation and the current generation to tell those stories deeper.
Indeed. So hip hop being a genre of marginalization, mostly, at least that's where it came from, but also hip hop being kind of the preeminent, dominant genre that is defining what is happening in pop culture now. Can we say that it's marginalized anymore? Are people still fighting to get attention when the spotlight is on hip hop and has been maybe for the last 10 years, let's say?
Yeah, I think things are different definitely now than they were when this book came out. And when the book came out, it was definitely different than it was 5 years before that, where it was unimaginable that hip hop would dominate the charts,
Drake,
the way that it did.
Drake is like top 3, right? Top 3 songs on the Billboard currently.
People were complaining at the Grammys because there wasn't enough rock in there, right? It felt like it literally felt like too hip hop for them. Read too black and maybe even too women, right? Too women centered for them. They wanted to have rock guitarists, male rock guitarists, and that kind of thing. And so things have changed a lot, I think. And for us, what we try to do is to cover the rise of hip hop, right? We need to be able to talk about the folks whose stories, they forced out into the world, made people pay attention to them. Like Dave said, we are here, right? To go and capture those stories. And then even to talk about now how hip hop represents folks who are the most marginalized in society. The fact that Cardi B, right, who just a few years before she sat down with Bernie Sanders, a presidential candidate, like give him her platform, right, was like in a really deep kind of situation in her own household with domestic violence and struggling as a student to make it through classes. I mean, just imagine that, like being in that particular situation, and then like 5-10 years later, being able to be at the top of the world, being the most powerful, being more powerful, like Erykah Badu said, like hip hop bigger than the government, right? Hip hop's bigger than the government, right? That she could be more powerful than all of the candidates combined. Dave likes to say that a lot, and it's true, it's real. So So that's the story that we need to tell about hip hop, that it's still representing these voices who society would rather push to the side. And I think that that's the important thing. It's probably the greatest story ever told about how these folks were able to make that happen.
One criticism about the book was that it focused on the politics.
Right.
Mhm.
It came from a political, social justice lens.
Right.
And you literally had people say, well, I got to talk about all that. Just talk about the music, the equivalent to shut up and dribble.
Hello.
And so here we are, in the young edition, we did the same thing. We came from that lens, because when you come from that lens, artists will change, but the systems of power and the dynamics around it, those are the same. So you can tell the story of the South Bronx, and somebody in LA might not see broken glass and burning buildings, but they go, I know oppression because it's being named. Defunding, policies of containment or abandonment, police terror, all those things, right? And so the stories we tell are looking at ways in which people triumph. That's first and foremost.
Mhm.
The second thing is that there are always these sharp contradictions. Here we are in 2021, and the headlines are saying the richest Black man in America is Kanye West with $6.8 billion worth, right? And I'm looking out my window right now, and there's a tent, two tents, right here where I'm looking, right? With Black people living in it, right? And that's just one of how many thousands in the city of Oakland, right?
Yeah.
And so we say that to say that it's not lost on us. We can celebrate some of these individual accomplishments, but at the end of the day, Black people and poor people and various people, in respective communities of color are marginalized. We are marginalized. And so why we celebrate Kanye being worth 6.8 million, can we get a reparations package passed in Oakland School District, right? Even after we went to the polls and put people in place.
Right.
Can we get some police accountability, even though we elected district attorneys around the country to do that job?
Right.
Can we make sure that people can afford, some sort of can they have housing?
Right.
Can we have rents that aren't $4,000 and $5,000,
Right.
which they are even after the pandemic?
Absolutely.
And so I think it's hip hop's job to recognize that, and to understand that even while we have these success stories, that we have our equivalent to Oprah in the form of Kanye, the majority of folks are still working, hand to hand and didn't get a stimulus check, right? Hip hop is out at the lake every Saturday and Sunday trying to sell wares and tears, doing the same type of hustle that folks that came before them were doing to try and make $1 out of 15 cents, right? And they're being criminalized for that. Folks, since we're talking about the Bay Area, folks were criminalized for selling tapes up on Telegraph Avenue.
Yeah.
They were criminalized for dancing at the Fisherman's Wharf to make some change. And they're criminalized when they get a business license and they set up at Lake Merritt and they go, let me sell some things. You still have people that are like, we don't want you here.
Right.
And so that's a recognition. And this is what, we don't get too far away from that. We understand that these expressions, these Black expressions, are still, representing a sentiment, an emotion that has often been told to, take a back seat while we center somebody else. Hip hop has not done that, and we didn't do that here.
Right. Word. So we've talked a lot about Black expression, and I'm here for it, of course. What we find, and especially since a lot of the new generation has to be kind of caught up to what some of us may know, is the omission of the Brown legacy in hip hop, right? Our Latinx brothers and sisters. What is that story, and how much did you incorporate it in Can't Stop, Won't Stop too?
I think it's pretty deep, and in the first edition, even, we were able to talk deeply about the Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Latino, Afro-Latinx kind of experience. And, really what you get, and Dave, you could talk about this even more, is in the Bronx, all of these different strands of the diaspora coming together in a moment under funk, right? Where James Brown's looking to Africa, right? And also to like salsa and Willie Colon and to, you know, the different strands of festival music or sort of street music, right? The kind of parade music that you see throughout the diaspora, those kinds of beats, right? That sort of get up and dance type of beat is the kind of sound that folks are dancing to in that particular period. So it's a beautiful thing. And, you know, the thing that we try to emphasize is the root of this is the foundation of this is diasporic Blackness, right? So the different types of forms that it takes, whether that be in South America, whether that be in the Caribbean, wherever that is happening, these are the things that are coming back together and sounding together, literally layering on top of each other in the polyrhythms of hip hop. And, you know, one of the things that we really try to do in this book as well is to talk about all these different types of strands, you know. So it's impossible to kind of think about the Los Angeles scene coming together, you know, without looking at the fact that you have a club like Radio where you've got Cholos in there, right? And Cholas in there. You've got Samoans in there. You've got Korean Americans in there, Filipino Americans in there, all dancing to this foundationally Black music. You know, black folks working with all these other types of folks and influencing, you know, the DJ sound system in Los Angeles, influencing the sound systems in the Valley that Filipino Americans are starting up, right? Like all of these different types of linkages that are happening. So these strands of influence that happen, and thinking about like how like the movements, the Latino movements influence like the Black movements as well, in terms of fashion, in terms of lowriders, in terms of like language, in terms of the way that people listen to their music and all these kinds of things. It's a really, really rich kind of history. And so, you know, it's a real pleasure to be able to kind of to introduce that and to be able to pass that on. Like kids who are growing up these days, they're going to naturally, if they grow up in our area, in the Bay Area, if they grow up in California, they're going to naturally grow up in these kinds of environments where all of these influences are crisscrossing. And we want people to be able to kind of see, look, there's all of these strands of folks figuring it out, how to work together. They got segregated together. Right. You know, they were racially segregated from white folks together. Right. But these are they come together through Black culture, through Black music, and create something that's really beautiful.
You know, growing up in the Bronx, it's very interesting because you have a diaspora that comes from all over. So you have a lot of people from the Caribbean that are there with people that are, you know, that have been in New York for 6 generations. So I have a family that's been there forever. And then you have folks that come up from the South. So there's some key people, you know, whose family, you know, who are pioneers where their families come up. And yeah, we can umbrella and say it's all Blackness, but there's also some differences, you know. First of all, we have Puerto Ricans that are there from day one, you know, that are with us. And people forget that's part of the Caribbean as well. And sometimes people don't want to be umbrellaed and they want to kind of pick apart and be like, look, this is mambo, you know, and this is African drums, and this is, you know, calypso, and all these things that became part of the rhythm track for all of us is important to recognize. So yeah, when you grew up, you heard all these different rhythms that were very different than the rhythms that I heard when I came out here, right? And, you know, I think as people have moved on, as they gotten older, they wanted to find the uniqueness of their respective ethnicities. So if you're Haitian, it's like, I want to know the Haitian contribution to this craft, because we were there, and they can pinpoint and say, well, this person or that sound or these sets of activities are very important to recognize. And there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of our Puerto Rican brothers and sisters are looking at, hey, these contributions, these were transformative moments that we contributed. For example, I think we highlight in the book, and it's very clear, like around 79, a lot of that stuff was dead. things were moving on. People was
Right.
like, they got older and it was like, I'm not doing that dancing no more. I'm getting ready to go to college. And then you had like, these younger Puerto Ricans that like, I'm still keeping this dance alive. And along with that, they brought, new styles to that. And you can find all these minutes, these stories that are important throughout. That's just one area. It's very different when you go to Philly or Washington, D.C., or you come out west where you have a whole different set of folks who may be umbrellaed as brown or Latin or what have you, but they also have, some very unique, things that they bring. The commonality that we find is that people have an oral tradition in all these cultures. There's always storytellers and the equivalent to griots, and music is a communication device that all of our communities use. The drum is very important and sacred in all these communities, whether it's the African or the indigenous. And so, you recognize that. And at the end of the day, we all use those tools of expression to fight and navigate oppression, and I think those are common themes as well. I think the Western construct has us get caught up in like who was first and who was second and who was all that. And, and you can go down all kind of rabbit holes with that. But at the end of the day, we're looking at, for the most part, we all lived in the Bronx. We live next door to each other. In other places, we live in proximity to each other, but we're all dealing with the same oppressive system. And we can look at how we uniquely and collectively battled that. And hip hop was one of the tools in which we were able to share, our navigation, our navigationists,
No doubt. Now let's build on the crossover a little bit. And the early 80s, we saw hip hop kind of take flight and become more of a mainstream expression, become accepted and appreciated, adopted by Hollywood, moreover, and then by the rest of the United States. And with that, and I think you guys draw this out in the book, and correct me if I'm wrong, but with that, you also see an uptick of policing over hip hop by and large. Talk to me about that, and talk to me about policing overall and how that's continued to kind of lord over hip hop as a culture.
Yeah, there's a really interesting kind of moment where as hip hop is breaking into the mainstream and it's beginning, like Run DMC is beginning to play arenas, and you got rap artists doing these big festival type dates and stuff all across the country. Run DMC, the Beastie Boys, you got Houdini out there, you got a bunch of different folks, Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. They're all on this Fresh Fest together. These types of tours tour the country, and there are situations where you've got a real mix of young folks coming together, and one or two incidents jump off, just like they would at rock concerts, just like they would at heavy metal concerts during the same period. But the thing is that it gives these very nervous politicians a way to be able to say, these youth are going crazy and we need to shut them down. And so soon what you see in the mid 80s is the passage of all of these different types of laws to limit where young people can hang out, when they can hang out, and how they can hang out. You have curfew laws going in. They can't stand on the corner anymore. Anti-loitering ordinances. They start getting called gangs. They start creating gang databases that swoop up all the names of folks, whether or not you were actually charged with any kind of thing. And pretty soon what you got is what you got now, which is a police state, right? You've got security in the hallways of schools. You've got situations where young people are like, there's warnings, right? Young people are not to go out. Young people are not to hang out. They just can't hang out. Instead, they're supposed to be programmed to do this or to do that, to do all these different kinds of activities that whatever, that government folks feel like is okay for you to do. So like, when I first came up here to Berkeley, you could go up to Telegraph Avenue and every weekend, everybody was on the street.
Right.
It's
And we
really
mean everybody, like the Booyah tribe used to come up here and hang out on
everybody.
Telegraph, you know?
Yeah, yeah. You had ciphers everywhere, rap ciphers, dance ciphers. You had people everywhere, all kinds of young people hanging out. And within 2 years, they shut all that down. And
But
that
but
was the moment where we started seeing the politics of containment that we actually see now today. The policing, particularly of where it starts is with young black bodies, right? And from there it expands to all these other types of neighborhoods to be able to police Chicano kids, Latinx kids, Asian kids, Pacific Islander kids. Like it's there in every community now. It's become standard. It's part of what everybody expects.
Right.
you know, even going back to the Telegraph Avenue, which became a big hangout.
Right.
The reason why people were in Telegraph Avenue was because they got kicked off the UC Berkeley campus.
That's right.
We went to school there. Everybody would be up at Delabach Hall around that area. And it was like, nah, y'all get out. And then everybody was there. But the point being is that what Jeff described, you found in all these cities all around the country, almost simultaneously. And there were all these laws. But remember, I started off by saying people would be at Fisherman's Wharf and they were being moved. And then people be at the lake and they're being moved. And you know, and if you were in the subways in New York, you were being moved, right? Instead of looking at folks and saying, wow, this is very talented what folks are doing here, like these dances and his music and his expression, let's nurture it. Let's see what we could do with it. Instead, it was criminalized. The same way that we have sideshows in Oakland, instead of going, wow, these people really flip their cars like that. Let's nurture that. Let's see the technological prowess that is being displayed by people who probably put their cars together themselves, or even how they figured out how to, you know, do these aerodynamics with certain types of cars. How did you figure that out, right? Instead of looking and seeing if we can take the talent and extract it from there, it's criminalized.
Right.
But meanwhile, in other parts of town, where you have activities going on, you know, for example, folks who are doing their garage bands, you know, at the beginning of some other music genres. Oh, wow, this is great. It sounds like noise, but let's nurture it. Let's massage it. Let's give it some opportunity to grow. You never had that. And what made hip hop very challenging is that some of the earliest shutdowns of it, it was policed by the police, but it was also policed by some of our elders, which people don't want to talk about. There were folks that's like, this is an embarrassment to us. We are, you know, we march with Dr. King not to have you, you know, dance in the middle of these streets. And so you had, Graham Mixer DST often talks about the word hip hop starts off being a pejorative. You know, it wasn't a positive word. It was like, go out and get out of this house with that hippity hop stuff, right? It was meant to be a derogatory type of thing because, and the reason why it was like, it was embarrassing. Right. And then you had some folks that were able to nurture, and those usually came in the forms of people who were coming from those grassroots organizations. So in the beginning, it would have been like the Young Lords, right? It would have been, you know, folks who were associated with the Panthers. It eventually became the Nation of Islam and the 5%. Those were the ones that were like, we like what you're doing. Let's nurture this some more. But, you know, there were infrastructures that controlled radio, that controlled TV, that were coming from our community. Magazines, it's like, we don't want no parts of it. And every once in a while, you got to break through, like a Harry Belafonte would do a Beat Street, but then it was far and few in between. And so you had young people who had to figure this out on their own, and they had to go through all the walls and you know, knock their heads before they finally were able to figure it out. The other thing too, you talked about crossover. And one of the things that's highlighted is that most of the time when you talk about crossover, we think of Run DMC and Aerosmith. Yeah. And that's a crossover story. But the real story is different, two vastly disenfranchised youth. One from the Lower East Side of Manhattan and those in the Bronx. The Lower East Side kids were into punk and new wave and all that. And the kids in the Bronx were into hip hop. That's where the crossing over came, but it was a genuine type of crossing over. It was a crossing over where, oh, wow, I like what you're doing. I like what you're doing. And I remember folks from downtown being able to come up to the projects and hang out and not, you know, in a very intentional way. Like, these are our folks. And those same folks were bringing people downtown, and that's a big story. And we need to explore that even deeper to see when people were on each other's records, when people were figuring out how to record with one another, you know, share equipment, all that sort of stuff, from the Clash to the Johnny Rottens to, you know, the Arthur Bakers and all those folks who were networking with your Cold Crushes and your Davey DMXs and all kind of people. That's the beautiful story. The Fab Five Freddies and all that. That, to me, I think, is a crossover that was kind of shortchanged, you know, for something that was a little bit more manufactured, which is like, we can win these white kids over to buy this product if we get this type of group to go with that type of group. Right. And in many ways, hip hop saved the careers of Aerosmith, not the other way around.
Right.
And so that's
I'm definitely fascinated in that. I want to dive back a little bit, not into policing, but into this notion of respectability and versus responsibility. So in reading the foreword by DJ Kool Herc, he talks about the intentionality around hip hop and what it was intended for, and that it's fun, and that it's, you know, about outsiders being able to kind of have their own voice, so on and so forth. But he also talks about the responsibility of hip hop to talk about the conditions in their environments, in community, the things that the mainstream is not talking about at the same time, and to represent it, whether they're talking about it in a rap song, whether they're doing it, you know, in tagging or in fashion, however the expression comes. At the same time, I feel that the older generation always gets to a place around that really teeters on respectability politics. And I wonder, and I wouldn't say that about Kool Herc's forward, but I just wonder, to play a little devil's advocate, what might a younger person feel about an older person's read on this book, and particularly like Kool Herc's call to maintain a certain kind of integrity in rap music or in hip hop as a broader culture. What would they feel? Would they feel like somebody, you know, that he was kind of policing them in some kind of way, requiring them to be respectable, or would they feel, you know, compelled to do as he is asking?
Well, I'll take that. We're all parents.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't call parenting policing. It's like, look, in my household, here are the rules and here's the path, right? And it may be our family doesn't do that. Or we may say, our Black folks don't do that. This is not how we're going to do, right? You know, you instill a certain path and traditions that you want your kids to pick up. Herc is 60 something years old, right? He's seen a lot, he's gone through a lot, and he may not have articulated it the way that I'm about to interpret it, but he's looking at a music industry that has come in and that has rearranged what the importance is. It's like if the three of us came into a room and we were a group, the industry goes, we don't need Jeff and Dave, we just take Ryan. Forget the rest of y'all, as they did the DJ in the group, right? That's one aspect of the music industry. Or they may come in and say, Ryan, can you lift your skirt up a little bit more and show some cleavage? Now, you may say this is me being empowered, and that may be totally legit, but that's not what they're telling you to do it for. It's a whole different set of, you know, for a whole other reason. It's to get eyes and ears on a salacious tip. They may tell me and Jeff to turn our hats backwards and, you know, keep it real, right? Mm-hmm. You know, so and not to keep it real because they think we're inauthentic, but to keep it real to satisfy the fetishization of Blackness or hoodness or whatever that they want to market to another audience. So Herc has seen that. And he's like, man, you know, don't go down this path. Mm-hmm. You know, let's keep it real. Let's keep an ethos that was involved with it, like being creative, which is what he says, you know. Or like Evan put it, keep it right, right? Yeah, keep it right. Keep it real, keep it right. And that's his job as somebody who is a pioneer. He's not supposed to tell you. He's supposed to be a father figure in that respect. Yeah. I think the kids will, younger audience, shouldn't say kids, I think a younger audience will appreciate it because we're giving them that history. right? The same way that when we picked up books, whether it was by Maya Angelou or whether it was by Malcolm X or, James, Richard Wright or others, they also gave you wisdom, right? They didn't call it policing. It's like, I'm giving you some gems and I'm lacing you up on some games so you can navigate a system that is trying to, hunt you down. And so I think the book comes from that spirit as well. It's not a thing of trying to police. It's a thing of like, you're going to be policed. This is how you can avoid the type of drama that systems of power are going to bring. So it's not a thing about pull your pants up and don't curse on the mic. This is a thing about maybe own your masters.
Right.
Don't sign the contract without, reading it fully through. Learn to get along with each other so your groups don't break up. And then, those are the type of pearls that you're trying to drop. At least that's what I pick up from it.
Word. Jeff, any thoughts?
It's just such a hard question, right? Like, I mean, from a parental point of view, right? Like, how do you get your kid to do what you want them to do? Like, you can lay it down and you can like actually dictate their entire life, and they'll figure out a way to get over on you, most likely, in some kind of a way. Or you can kind of like, feed it with a little bit of sugar. I would hope my approach is like, this book is a little bit of sugar, hopefully, with the stuff that we want to leave with you. That's just sort of, maybe that's just who I am, I guess. I don't know.
I think it's pretty sugary, by comparison.
I don't know. I guess we'll find out, right? Like your daughter will tell us, my kids will tell me, Dave's kids will tell us.
Right.
I think ultimately the responsibility that we take seriously is not to be age appropriate, right? To not try to be like try to be the cool kids. We're not that. That's not who we are.
You jive turkey, give me some skin. We're not trying to be those.
That's not us. We're just trying to do, we're just trying to we're trying to be age appropriate. We're trying to basically like do what it is that we need to do, which is pass on the stories and the information and the knowledge that we, hope people will be able to kind of carry on and that kind of thing. And we'll, I guess we'll see.
But Ryan, let me just say something though. You said respectability politics, and I think we should be clear what that is.
Yeah.
Respectability politics, at least how I saw it coming up, and it was very clear. This is an embarrassment.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the people who said that this is an embarrassment because, look, we marched. I'll give my mom, perfect example. She's the only Black woman at a bank. She was one of the first Black women in New York to work at a bank, right? So she had to go through that. She had to deal with all kind of crazy stuff. And my mom, in her way of resisting the type of, snootiness and what have you, it's like, my kids go to good schools. My kids got, perfect grade, that's, like any parent. Here I come with the hat backwards, right? And I remember, going down to her job and her, coming out before I even got in, grabbing my ear. And it's like, you will not embarrass me today, right? I will knock the Black off you. You turn your hat around,
right?
Put your pants leg down. You were not raised like that. And you come in here and you say hello and you look people in the eye. That was my mom. Now, I'm not going to say, well, in this case, she's like, you're not going to show me up on my job, right? But you scale that up. And you have people who's like, we're not playing this stuff on the radio because advertisers don't want to hear it. This is not what Martin Luther King would do. So you had that type of thing. Some of it was legit, but a lot of it was also, people's own insecurities and their own type of them trying to figure out how they were going to cross over and not be held back. We were that embarrassing uncle that shows up at the picnic, at your job, like, Ryan, you don't act all sophisticated. I'm your uncle, gold teeth, Hennessy in hand, and and turning up,
Uncle like that. I'm not any uncle like that.
Well, we all have a relative, that will show up and kick up dust and be like, don't act like you don't know me.
Right, you know me.
And hip hop was that type of institution, but the difference was Herc, I know for fact,
Yeah.
goes around and has given himself, time. He's gone to like Rebel Diaz's school and
Yeah.
in the Bronx and unannounced, no cameras, and work with these kids, day in and day out on his own, right? That's very different than folks who would tell you to pull the pants leg up and then they're not trying to help you do anything. They're not trying to nurture your talent. They're doing it for the sake of looking good themselves and not looking and saying, let me extract some of the goodness and give you some guidance. And that sort of respectability, I don't think that's not where we're coming from. And I hope, and that's a difference. That's to delineate that.
It's an important distinction, and I'm just glad you make it. I know, being younger, I could never differentiate as a youth, couldn't differentiate when my parents were giving me wisdom, which was all the time, and when they were just on my head about something because they had a perspective and they didn't understand my perspective. And I just, as I know that this book comes with that same intentionality to pass down the wisdom, la lucha continua, the hope is that, it is that delineation is discerned, that this is about giving you the game and helping to lead you down the path, as opposed to wagging our fingers and telling you what you're doing is not hot.
And let's be clear. There are many in hip hop today who do that.
Absolutely.
They sit back there, all this mumbly rap that you all are doing. So they're the equivalent to the parents that were like, get this hippity hop stuff out. And there are people like, oh, this mumbly rap that they're doing in Chicago. We didn't do that back in the days. Right. And it's like, what days were back in the days? And it's like the 90s. It's like, well, let me pull out this. You can pull out a Biggie record or a Wu-Tang record or a Mobb Deep record and say, let's listen to the lyrics of some of these songs. And, some of them songs were pretty, try playing Children's Story in front of kindergarten, which I did a few years ago. And then it was like, hey, I got a classic song for you. And then we're all listening to it. And it's like, Dave the Dope Fiend. And, and it's like, gee, this is.
Never mind.
This, But you had to play the whole record and everybody's sitting there. So kids, it's like, what's a dope fiend, mommy? And why is he screaming? Why'd the cop shoot him?
Right.
Oh, I know Erica was not down for that.
No doubt. I'm going to ask y'all one more question, and then I want to get to the questions that are in the chat. I know there's a couple, or at least one. And if there are any questions that are coming up for y'all, please type them in the chat so that I can hand them over to Davey and Jeff, who are so generously giving of their wisdom to us today. So my question is, what place does hip hop have right now in the Me Too movement, in this kind of new era? I don't even need to editorialize it. What place does hip hop have in the Me Too movement?
I think hip hop's oh, go ahead, Dave, if you want to.
I think hip hop has I think hip hop has a long way to go, but I also think hip hop, and I'm not limiting hip hop to artists, but people who came up under the hip hop generation, I think they've been pretty forthright. I think there's a Me Too movement because of people coming out of that hip hop space. There's a Me Too movement because of the groundwork of people like a Joan Morgan and others who challenged, what was going to be our relationship between men and women, who challenged, misogyny early on. That lays down the groundwork for others to say, we need to start holding people accountable. And to the degree that, we do have to hold people accountable. So nothing is, there's a lot of work to be done, but I also think hip hop needs to be credited, or people within hip hop, for speaking truth to power early on and then acting up on it. Whether it's your Rosa Clementes, whether it's your Trisha Roses, these are writers, whether it's your Sa Rocks, or your Rhapsodies and, and so many others who have challenged, the way that we as men are going to view the world and view women, the Tony Blackmans who I mentioned. That's all very important. People like yourself, and we can go down the list. So hip hop has a responsibility to do better than what was done in the past. That is our responsibility And that's what I mean when I say we have more work to do, because we can pick up any number of records that are that are coming out right now, and they're still on the same stuff.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of people that have really moved on, and that's a good thing.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
I mean, Tarana Burke, right, the founder of Me Too, she'll tell you she's straight up hip hop. She came out of hip hop activism, and I've done a lot of hanging out with Tarana. Like, Tarana's straight up hip hop.
Right.
And at the same time, this sort of hip hop feminist critique is like the cutting edge of feminist critique, and you see it showing up right now in the culture and the music, and that's the powerful thing, right? When you can have Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion, and doing their thing at the Grammys like they did, unapologetically, and to be able to talk about that and talk about the reckoning that's going on in hip hop right now around sexual assault and sexual abuse. Cardi has talked about it, like, very much so in a direct kind of a way, about how she's seen it happen within the industry. And she's somebody who knows, like, it's really an amazing period right now to see what's happened in terms of women in hip hop. Women in hip hop are running it right now. They're running things. They're running the world, and I just, it's a welcome type of moment. We've also seen a lot of figures toppled by Me Too. It affected choices that we had to make in the book about some folks, and no names here really, but it's been an overdue reckoning, and Dave and I are with it.
Word.
Yeah.
Well,
but this is not a new thing. Let's go all the way back to the days of the 90s.
Yes, sir.
After Dre and the whole situation with D Barnes, and people like the Poetess and others stepped up, and they put those records out, and those conversations were had then. The difference is that you didn't have the institutional support. Right. You didn't have the radio stations and others to get behind it. But remember, these institutions that peddle hip hop, that's something you have to factor in. Long before, when people were calling, for example, accountability on R. Kelly, you had program directors, both men and women, right here in the Bay and other places, like, we're going to play him. Right. Record companies were still putting him out, right? Whereas if that same artist made transgressions in other arenas, they would have shut him down. Okay. So, we also got to be clear about that as long as it's making money for some of these institutions, they will find a way to continue to push it at the expense, usually, of Black women and Black folks. So if you're the one complaining, then too bad. If it's other people complaining, then maybe they'll take a look and say, let's hold them accountable.
Indeed. On that line of questioning, I'm going to read a question from Luke. He says, with utmost respect to you both, and you guys can elect to answer this or not based on the last answer, does Africa Bambaataa feature in the new book, and how have you handled the issues that surrounding him following the 2016 allegations?
He's in the book. We make a mention, that there are these scenarios that surround him. It was a question that all of us have that deal with hip hop, because what Bam has done as a contributor to this culture, it's true. I mean, in the sense that there's no denying his work and his contributions. There's no denying what he meant for this culture. There's no denying the type of things that he helped put in place. At the same time, these other revelations are things that, you can't ignore. So there's no fanfare with Bam. We're not like holding him up as something that somebody that you laud, but you can't erase him from his contributions. So that's how we kind of handled that. But I think it's also something where the Bambaataa situation is something that is part of a larger conversation of sexual exploitation, sexual predatorness, and all that stuff that, you can do a whole book on that. And we didn't want Bam's scenario to take away from the beauty of everybody else, so you don't want to have that become the main focus when you have all these other people that that didn't go that route. So we give people a heads up about it, and we give the facts about Bam. This is what Bam did. This is what he did on this day. This is his accomplishments, and we kept it moving, to the next person. That's how we were able to handle it, and let, again, for young adults, let teachers and parents, go into a deeper dive on that with him.
Word. And reading the note from the authors, by the way, and I just want to speak and ask about cancel culture. Reading the note from you all feels like a bit of an inoculation from cancel culture, knowing that maybe at some point in the future, some words that are included, some phrasings, whatever, may be deemed untenable, unsavory in the future. What are your thoughts about cancel culture, and where do you think, how will hip hop navigate that moving forward?
Are you talking about the note from the authors at the beginning in terms of the usage of the N word and how we chose to kind of bowdlerize it a little bit?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk a little bit about why we decided to make that choice, and Dave, maybe you can talk about the cancel culture piece of it. But we discuss language in the book. Right. This is a young adult book. We know a lot of adults are going to read it. We know a lot of adults are going to listen to the audiobook. And at the same time, we wanted to be sensitive to the kinds of things that were happening. And so, we made the decision that we were going to make the choice with certain kinds of words not to include, not maybe just why include these quotes, right? If we don't need them, but specifically to bowdlerize the N word. And, for me, it came down to that after the book came out in 2005, I was blessed enough to be able to take it around, right? And to tour the book. And I remember distinctly, I went to, bring the book to Sweden. It was translated into Swedish. And we did an event at, of all places, the Museum of World Culture, like their multicultural museum. And so the audience there, I mean, Sweden's, big cities are as diverse as any other city in Europe. And that's the kind of crowd that showed up that night. And there were women who were African immigrants there. And they raised the question. They said, like, why did you use these words? And I said, why? I use these words because the artists use them. And I would hope that people would have a discussion about it. And they said, well, do you understand that when those words are used out of context, that they can have effects, on folks? And I said, yeah, I definitely understand that, being a person of color, right? Being somebody who is a minority in the country that I was born in. And then, we kind of moved on in the discussion, but there was a young white gentleman in the front row who wouldn't let it go and asked the question, well, I thought it was different if you spelled it with an A versus with an ER. And the women in the back were just like, do you see? You see exactly what we're talking about here? And, and that was something that was, I gave a pretty snide comment to the guy to kind of let him know that it was not cool for him to be using that word like that. But, at the same time, it was just like, okay, if we're going to do this, then it's definitely going to raise questions amongst readers and amongst teachers about why that's the case. Because we use all kinds of curse words. We don't censor or bowdlerize any other curse words in the book, with the exception of one other, which we can talk about as well. But, or two. But we wanted to force that conversation about why it's not it's not right for people to be able to use that word and to understand the context in which it's used. We wanted to force that conversation on people. And so that's why we made that decision to do it in this particular instance.
The N-word's an ethnic slur, and I went to school in New York City where the word was used in all types of books that we had to read, sometimes out loud. Huckleberry Finn comes to mind. The Hardy Boys, I think it might have been Encyclopedia Brown. I also went to school because, my mom was one of these people that was like, you're going to go to school in this area, outside the South Bronx. So I had to go to Pelham Bay, school in Pelham Bay. And, I'm not sure if we make mention of it, but Pelham Bay is like, when you went there, that was like, you were stepping into a whole other area where we weren't welcome. There was a housing project nearby, and those folks weren't welcome to leave that, without a whole lot of drama. So hearing the N-word being read aloud and people laughing and then calling, and saying little things, is that you? Or you're that person, that's who you are. My daddy told, those types of things are stuff I remember. My sister being called that, right? And so, sure, in one part of town, it's no big deal. But in another part of town, this may be the excuse that people use and say, I was just reading the book. Well, no, not on our watch, not our book, And to Jeff's point, have that conversation, but it's not a freedom of speech thing in that regard, like the other curses, those aren't ethnic slurs, those aren't gender slurs, those aren't, that's a very different thing. And one story I'll tell is that, working at one of these big companies, I had a boss who walked around singing at the top of his lungs, Jigga the N-word, because Jay-Z had performed it on MTV. And when I called it out, he was like, I'm just singing the song, it was on MTV. And so now you're forced to deal with a power dynamic, Do I continue to confront this and lose a very good job? Do I continue to confront this and maybe be stifled? Am I insulated from any sort of retaliation? And you oftentimes get other people who look just like you who co-sign that, So in this case, I had another Black person at the job co-signing. Yeah, it's just a word. Stop tripping. Well, I did trip, and I called the corporate office, and there was hell to be paid. But not everybody has that luxury and is in that position to do that. Sometimes you got to grin it and take it. And I'll also close, there were police officers and hate crimes that have taken place in the Bay Area where people have, used the N-word and then said, oh, it's just N-I-G-G-A. In San Jose, I think it was a case where somebody did 187 N-I-G-G-A and then put the teacher's name and then explained that it was just a hip hop term, and the judge sided with them, if I remember correctly. So we don't need to go down that path. And I'm glad we did what we did, so without apology.
Responsibility. I appreciate it. I'm gonna ask this question from Myron. Are hip hop supergroups and duos a bygone era?
The posse cut and all of that. Yeah.
No. And you know what I'm about to say. I just did an interview with them this morning. Look up Grand National.
Yes.
Out of the Bay Area. So you have your High Roll group, you have your Living Legends, you have your HBK. But Grand National, that is the truth. And, explore their music, explore their concept. And what they're doing is a clear indication to me that the posse thing is not dead. Even if they're the only one in the country doing it, is not dead, because what they're doing right now in their whole concept of being beyond music is something that I think is going to be a hallmark of the Bay Area in terms of being innovative, and I think will change the game. And I say that in all sincerity. And I'll close, D Sharp was a part of that. And I was talking to D Sharp. I was like, yeah, D Sharp, I remember when you was telling me about the group, but I didn't know when D Sharp told me about the group, he was just a fan. He was like, I was just a fan. Now I'm a part of it. And I was like, really? Wow. He was that hyped about it that,
Yeah.
But I'm hyped about them.
Yes, you should
And
be.
I think you had them in the movie that you
I
did.
did. I did.
Yeah, so for people who don't know, Ryan's a filmmaker, and you had them in that movie. So am I lying?
You're not lying.
Am,
You're
am
not
I
lying. They're
that's some
phenomenal.
next level stuff,
Yeah, yeah. Get ready. Get your ears ready.
Yeah.
So Myron, hip hop supergroups are not a bygone era. Grand National spelled with an X.
Excel. Yeah.
Yeah, and XL at the very end. So check them out. Do you guys have anything you want to add? And unless somebody else has a question in the chat, I just want to ask you all to just, if you want to pontificate, if you want to say anything, if there was a question we missed or something that you're itching to say, here's your chance.
I just want to let everybody know that, we're here in a pandemic, and book releases are different than they've ever been. We would have loved to have done this in person with you, to be able to vibe and that kind of thing, and share space and share food and all that kind of stuff, the kind of stuff that we always do, but we can't. So what we're trying to do instead is to invite the world to our doorstep. So what we're going to be doing on March 27th is the equivalent of a block party. We're going to be doing a worldwide block party all day, like sun up to sunset, way past sunset, round the clock. We're going to just be having all the best DJs on Twitch. And we're doing this with a bunch of other folks, our friends. Rocky Rivera has got a new book out called Snakeskin. She's just amazing. We're such fans of Rocky, and our old good friend Rob Kenner, who has this new book that's called The Marathon Don't Stop, The Life and Times of Nipsey Hussle. So check for that. You can find out all the information on the Instagrams and the Twitters and all that kind of thing. But March 27th, you won't have any excuse. You got all the DJs.
We got everybody from Rich Medina on down, so it's gonna be popping.
Umami, Ladyfingers, D Sharp's gonna be there.
Ooh.
Chewy, Alex Mejia, Chewy Gomez,
Sazon playing on the
Libre,
radio.
Kwame, like everybody. we're everybody's gonna be coming out for this.
Nice.
So it's gonna be an amazing thing, and you can check it out on Dave's channel, Davey D, Twitch, and on True School.
Yeah, it's a celebration of hip hop, and that's going to be our block party, our virtual block party, and it should be fun. The last thing I would just say is that this has been an experience. It's been a good 2 years of doing this. I want to thank Jeff for first of all opening the doors, and and being able to see up close how this process works. Writing a book is definitely a process. It is definitely a process. At one point, I was so sick of hip hop, I wasn't even listening to it. I would come in and be writing stuff, and I was like, let me put this country stuff on, and I became very good at listening to a lot of jazz and other genres, but it was a work of love. But I think the real love comes from the people that we try to represent, who came before us, whose stories we were able to convey, and whose wisdom we were able to, hopefully reflect. And, this is, it's a history book, with younger generation in mind, but it's also a very intentional baton being passed. So there are a lot of other stories to be told. There are folks who are now going much deeper into, the inner workings of some of the pioneers we talk about. Those stories will be uplifted and need to be. There are parts of the country that need to be explored a lot deeper than what we could ever do. And that's the baton. So you don't have to tell the story about the South Bronx anymore. You don't have to do that framework. You can go, here's the Oakland story. Here's the Frisco story. Here's the Vallejo story. Here's the story of people over 6 feet tall. Here's the story of people under 4'11". Those things are wide open, and we need to have those stories, because we're living in a world that wants to erase all of us. you know, and they start by dehumanizing us and then recontextualizing or retelling our stories with us either being marginalized, powerless, or, you know, or some other sort of discombobulated individual or group of people. So this was a gem to do it. So thank you, and thank you for your time and coming out.
Yeah, folks, so check it out. Get the book. Please make a purchase. Please, if you have any young folks, make sure they make a purchase. If you have any institutions, schools, whatever, that, you know, could use this hip hop history, I think every high school in OUSD, SFUSD in the Bay Area should be holding this book, having it as a part of their curricula. There's sites in there. The whole book is cited, you know, that there's just opportunity to learn more. This is a baton passing. It's a wonderful book. I'm grateful to be here.
We also have a teacher's guide for it as well.
There you go. That's right.
Yeah.
There's reading questions back there. So
teacher's guide that, you know, got some input from actual teachers from Oakland.
Wow, check it out.
There you go.
Word. Well, thank you, Davey.
Thank you.
Jeff. Yeah.
Thank you so
and
much,
Evan, I see your face.
Amazing. Thank you, Evan.
Back in to say everything that you just said. The book is a baton. It's a gift. It's a very rich history, you guys. If you haven't read it, you got to pick it up. However you can. I prefer you do it from Booksmith, but get it however you can. Thank you, Jeff, Dave. Congratulations, and thank you for this excellent work.
Thank you for having us, Evan.
My pleasure. Truly, RyanNicole, thank you for leading this beautiful conversation. Yes, and those of you at home, yeah, take care and stay well. Hopefully we can all party in person. Otherwise, see you on the 27th.
There you go. Peace.
Absolutely.
Good night.